Okay, let us set the stage. This video is kind of a love letter to Twiggy, my wife. Alright, now that I've made the mandatory degenerate Zenless Zone Zero YouTuber comment, ever since the Echoes of Silver agent story came out, I have been absolutely in love with this character, genuinely. It hit me personally so extremely hard, and I've been working on the script, gathering my thoughts about this character ever since. Now, with 1.7 coming out in a few days, I've now decided to make this video before the character falls completely into irrelevancy, potentially, and pour my heart out about what exactly this character did to me and why she should be playable and come back in the future. So, if you love Twiggy as a character, are interested in what I have to say, or are simply dropping by to have someone talk while you put on this YouTube video to fall asleep to, I'm glad you're here, and let's get started as to why this character deserved so much better. The main reception to Twiggy was pretty split overall, I feel like. There's definitely a wide spectrum, ranging from people like me, who genuinely like her, to people who are confused as to why could someone possibly empathize with her. Not to toot my own horn, but I'd consider myself to be among the most dedicated Twiggy fans, and would like to share my analysis of Twiggy, why she deserves to be, and should absolutely be a playable character. However, before we get fully into it, this is just a spoiler warning. I am writing this as of the Zenless patch 1.6. Make sure you have played through the entire story, even part 1 of Barrier Tears with the past, and all of the agent stories, like, Twiggy's agent, or Soldier Zero Anby's agent story, and everything. Just make sure you're up to date with the content that's available. And because I genuinely think it is worth playing. This is your story warning. Enjoy the video. The thing is, playable character slots are very carefully considered. We do get a lot of new characters, and the amount of them in the roster is quickly adding up. At the same time, each character has to be appealing to a broad audience, visually appealing, and marketable. Obviously, the main goal for Hoyo is for people to wail over them, get them to M6, and so on and so forth. That's what brings in the money, right? However, before we get straight into that, with Twiggy being, obviously dead and an antagonist at that, what chance could she possibly have to return as a playable character? At the current rate, we get 2 limited characters each patch, alongside the occasional A-rank character, like Pulcro or Seth. While the characters add up over time, quickly adding more and more faces to the ever-expanding roster, the slots are pretty limited overall. Playable characters, especially limited ones, need to have a certain appeal to them, obviously. The goal as a gacha game for Zenless Zone Zero and, other Hoyoverse titles is to get people to get invested in the characters, in order for them to become, pullable, aka simpable. There are obviously preferences hidden in the characters, like Caesar as a tomboy, despite her noodle arms, alongside Jane and Evelyn, as femme fatales, Julian and Yanagi being the mommies, and Bernice, being the brain rot wildcard, essentially. All in all, though, I'd say the characters are still designed broadly enough and equipped with a certain personality to appeal to a large part of the player base. With the game shifting towards a darker tone, as seen with the Harumasa and Soldier Zero Anby stories, as well as the general tone of the story, it would make sense for them to give an antagonist a chance. This is, in my opinion, where Twiggy comes in. As for her, she needs some level of character to substitute the dark Anby character that was established in the episode. Otherwise, I think the player base is too split on her to give her a chance, potentially. So, now the question is, can she be redeemed? And what even is her character outside of that? For me, personally, Twiggy is redeemable because she's relatable. So, before fully diving into my reasoning, I'd like to share my personal experience as to why Twiggy is a character that I relate with on such a deep level. So, throughout my entire teenage years, closer to an entire decade, I was in a relationship with whom I thought was the love of my life. Whenever we weren't at work or school, we were together 24/7. We were in a video call all the time, never even stopping when we went to bed. We just fell asleep next to each other in the call. We could talk about, everything and anything. We were inseparable. This went on for years. Then, about 1.5 years ago, she broke up with me. In hindsight, there were so many things but mainly also I could have done better. But the main point is that during those 1.5 years, I went through essentially every emotion there is. I am filled with the regret and the pain to this day, even. I was in mental clinics for months. I've dealt with suicide, and even with all this time, I only thought about her. For me, there was no future, no other passions, no drive to do anything else. It was all meaningless. This is despite the fact that, I know that, even if she were to come back, things just wouldn't be the same. This feeling of being stuck in the past, unable to move on, despite knowing that I can't get back what I, or Twiggy, lost, is precisely what gets me to resonate with her on such a fundamental level. I remember her quote during the agent story, where she says,
"Sometimes I wonder if I were just an ordinary citizen in New Eridu and not part of Silver Squad, maybe I could have become a researcher at the White Star Institute, studying deep topics like 3 forms of etheric manifestation in specific hollows."
This shows to me that while technically she has the ability to think about other possibilities, she doesn't actually see it as a possibility. I can't tell you how much I related to this, right? This feeling of, yeah, technically it's possible, but let's be honest, it's not gonna happen. Partly due to self-sabotage or just the mental blockade of being in a depression and not being able to see a way out of this. Right. I felt exactly the same way when people would tell me, yeah, it's going to get better, there will be someone else. But all I could think about was just, yeah, right, whatever, right? Technically anything can happen. But nothing beats her. Nothing beats Silver Squad for Twiggy. So Twiggy's only goal, essentially her obsession, is somehow trying to return to a happy life, having her sisters, Silver Squad, back. After everything she's been through, her only wish is to have her sisters back and tries to do everything in her power to achieve that goal. However, her power is limited. Let's talk about character limitations. Characters in Zenless aren't omnipotent, right? They have limited resources, limited abilities. Gameplay and story are a bit different here. In the regular gameplay, we're essentially, unkillable masters and kill hordes of enemies and stuff. But in the story, at large, we're not invulnerable. We are killable. Just by looking at, Hugo getting donated by Lycon. Or just a few minutes earlier when we were surrounded by hardmen and a few faceless soldiers. Right? If that were just like normal gameplay, obviously, they wouldn't have stood a chance, right? But in the story, right, it was like, oh man, we can't do anything. So we kind of have to make do what we have, stay in our lane and work on our own things. For reference, as a personal anecdote again, I am a graphic designer, and while I do have skills such as, knowledge about designing, aka visual problem solving, layouting, hierarchy, color theory, typography, branding, right? Those skills alone aren't useful on their own. I need to do something with that knowledge to create value. Something that brings in money. Some things earn more money, some things earn less. At the end of the day, in order to bring food on the table and secure my own survival, I have to do what's necessary in the best way possible for me. Essentially, we all try to give ourselves the best possible gain with the least possible loss. If we get a bit darker here, for example, in the story of Zenless, if you were talking about killing, such as going to war, would I personally use my skills as a designer to maybe even work in the industry, design propaganda posters, manuals, and weapon instructions, aka like enabling the war, the killing, just to avoid the pain of having to go to war myself, right? My self-preservation instincts tell me yes, despite how much I may dislike it and makes me seem selfish. What do you think, though? I personally think, with that reasoning in mind, Twiggy's decision, cloning herself, selling the organs of her replicas, would be the most efficient way to earn money and connections, as well as the fastest possible solution to her eventual goal, right? Restoring the only former happy times of her previous life by reviving Silver Squad, fighting for the rights of the replicas, enacting revenge on all the people who have wronged her. Obviously, making borderline unethical choices, like creating war propaganda graphics and actually harvesting organs, is quite a huge difference, but the core principle is the same to me. I understand why she did it completely, right? It doesn't make it right, of course, just like how I would have doubts of doing unethical things. Twiggy even herself tells Anby that she's disgusted with herself, hates herself for doing it. It was essentially the only way she could have achieved that goal. If she were to have picked up a normal job, right, like becoming a scientist at the research institute, as she mentioned, right, she still wouldn't have been able to secure the level of funding, material, and connections like the one with Hartman and the rest of TOPS. So it was, while horrible, kind of essentially the only option she had. So at the end of the day, in my opinion, what she did was the most efficient and essentially the only way to achieve her final goal, despite the obvious temporary pain and suffering. So, can Twiggy be redeemed? First off, she isn't redeemed. Not yet. However, I think that the knowledge of her crimes makes her still able to be redeemed. If she didn't see anything wrong with it, that's where I'd probably also draw the line. I think if it was a more expansive story, they could have done so much more than just turn her into an ethereal last minute, which is kind of very sad to me because I think her mindset is very humanizing, to me at least. The main point of interest for me is the duality between Anby and Twiggy, and even though since they are started out the same, they couldn't be more different now. Anby was found by Nicole, who was able to give her a new life, treat her well, and allow Anby to move on. Twiggy, on the other hand, had it much worse. She lost her limbs, was sold on the black market with obvious insinuations, being experimented on, right? She has no one to rely on, no one to go to. As she said in the story, all she had left was her memories. I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that she would work towards revenge. All she wants to do is revive Silver Squad. She wants her sisters back. She wants her safe space back. Similar to my situation, when my ex left me, I was unable to enjoy anything, any passion, unable to get out of bed, and unable to achieve anything. The only thing on my mind, the only thing I could think about, was her, right? This is why Twiggy means so much to me. Because I totally get it. Just like me, Twiggy's unable to move on, and even though she knows that there is no way for her to get back what she's lost, she's still obsessed with it. So Twiggy makes reviving Silver Squad her new life goal, but obviously her research requires funding, which is why she has to resort to the organ harvesting. Yes, it's bad. I also understand the implications, of her becoming the exact thing she swore to destroy by treating replicas as expendable. However, one thing that makes me question the absolute evilness of the process is how Girl A tells Twiggy, thank you for letting me be born in the end. I find it hard to find the right words for what it makes me feel. But I understand the story's point of life shouldn't be engineered, but what Twiggy created is still sentient life. And that's why I also understand Twiggy's desire for revenge against the original creators of the Silver Squad project, since even though to the greater public, even though they don't know anything about the replicas, just the fact that she exists, that tells us she exists. Racism isn't okay, even if it's just one different person, right? So I find it agreeable that the people responsible must be punished. Twiggy knows that she can't do it alone, so creating an army, seems completely sensible to me. For her, the pain of killing her sisters to score funding to continue the plan until it's done is worth it. And I kind of agree, right? It's bad what she's doing, she knows it, but she does it for a sensible reason, not just because she likes harvesting organs or making money. But even with that, the fact that she knows that it's wrong tells us that she still has a moral compass. She just thinks that she's too deep into it, too far gone to stop. Otherwise, killing her sisters would have all been for nothing, right? If Twiggy had, accepted Anby's deal of oh yeah, come with us, right? All of her sisters still would have been, dead and, the organs harvested, for essentially nothing. For me, I thought that nothing, would replace losing the love of my life. Technically, sure, there are millions and billions of people, to get into a relationship with. But for me, nothing could replace, the one who I thought, was the one for me. For Twiggy, she also doesn't see that there could be any other situation. that, there could be other outcomes for her. Deep down that she knows she should quit, but the conflict in her is too strong. If Nicole had been there, like 100% Twiggy would be called, Twiggy Demara now, like I think. So that's why I think that Twiggy can still be redeemed. She isn't yet in what we got with the story. Like, unfortunately, it was just kind of like all right, I'll turn myself into an ethereal and die. And that kind of like really hits me hard, because I kind of secretly hoped for a, like, if you want to change, you'll always be able to, kind of message. But what we got just wasn't it, right? Even with Anby telling Twiggy that she's gone too far, like that kind of really, really hit me, because like Anby was the only final beacon of hope that Twiggy essentially still had, right? Like, I know I'm coping, but I hope that Twiggy can eventually be revived. Let's also discuss Twiggy's actual role in the story thus far, as a foil to Anby, and where each of them come from. Both Anby and Twiggy share the same origin, being part of Silver Squad, but of course their paths couldn't be further apart now. After Anby's suicide attempt, as seen in one of the trailers, she was stumped and ended up being randomly found by Nicole and joining the Cunning Hares. She even adopted Nicole's last name. Essentially, she's part of a new family now, and is extremely loyal to Nicole, but also the rest of the Cunning Hares. She dedicates herself to them, finding contentment and purpose within her new life. In my opinion, Anby seems like she is just enjoying her life now, which obviously isn't wrong by any means, but it seems like to me that she's enforcing that level of passivity that she has by simply, accepting and embracing the life that was offered to her, rather than having her own goals and motivations. She seems to have found some low-stakes hobbies and interests, like watching movies or War Wars, but all in all, to me, it feels like she's a very passive person and unwilling to commit to larger decisions. Anby was extremely lucky to have found Nicole. Twiggy, not so much. They're complete polar opposites, right? Like, I do get the point of, hey, what, Twiggy is the result of, oh, hey, what if Anby wasn't found by Nicole? She endured so many wrongs done to her. She had to watch everyone she's ever loved die, lost all her limbs, was sold around and experimented on. She never had the chance to develop and form other bonds. The suffering, the experiments, that's all she's ever known. She's fueled by trauma, the desire for revenge, and most importantly, having the only happy time in her life back, Silver Squad. She actively dedicates her life towards recreating the technology and desperately clinging towards the past. She actively sought out connections, people that she could work with, to reach her final goal of getting her family back. I think it's kind of an interesting twist. One is passively accepting the future, while the other one is actively chasing the past. Twiggy needed genuine help, not just an offering. For me personally, the thing that helped me was people actually taking the initiative, such as friends bring me along, or someone expressing interest in me and telling me how she feels. If I had been left to my own devices, I would have probably never gotten out. I know some people would probably disagree with me here, but I know the notion of you can only help yourself if you want to help yourself. But imagine if, during part 2 of the Echoes of Silver story, Anby didn't just invite her to join her. Even then, Twiggy acted kind of like a tsundere, outwardly, ridiculing it. But secretly, you could tell that she kind of like wished to join it, right? But instead, literally, what if Anby said, come on, Twiggy, let's go. Like, I genuinely don't think Twiggy would have declined it, declined being forced to come along. Maybe kind of even kind of a bit of a dynamic like Bernice and Pokra. It gets even sadder when we get to the final confrontation between them, where Anby is actually active for once, but uses it to judge and reject Twiggy's attempt and reconciliation. Like, Anby is the only one Twiggy still had, setting aside the new characters. Like, for example, if Nicole had been there, 100%, Twiggy, would be the second, Silver Squad, Cunning Hair member now, right? But that flat out rejection from Anby, where she was like, oh yeah, I wish you had died back in the Hollow. Like, holy fuck. It felt like a slap in the face, to me as a viewer and, for Twiggy, I'd assume. Like, it's like Anby never tried to listen to Twiggy and just, refused anything that didn't fit her worldview. I think that Soldier 11 was right when she called Anby a coward. Because, that's kind of what she is, right? don't get me wrong, I still like our Burger Girl, but this is like it's just a major flaw that she has. In the agent story, we also get a bit of an insight about how Anby wants to do things herself and has to learn to ask for help, right? As for Soldier 11, when we learned that at the end of the agent story, her memory had regressed and didn't remember Anby anymore, like Anby was happy about it, stating that, you know, Soldier 11 is better off living with hatred, and it's good that it's focused on Anby. Like, I was kind of dumbfounded when I saw that part of the story. Like, it's more along the lines of that Anby is a coward who doesn't want to make major decisions in her life. She willingly let Soldier 11 stay in the position of being in the defense force, you know, despite knowing that Soldier 11 she is a disturbed individual as well. Like, why is she not allowed to heal from her trauma? Why does she have to live with the hatred? You know, like, why does Anby think that she can decide the choice for Soldier 11? Like, Anby accepted the help towards healing and the redemption of becoming free from Silver Squad, but she never extended that olive branch to anyone else. Like, not to Soldier 11, not to Twiggy, no one. One more thing I find interesting is how we already have a character that has committed atrocities and is still liked by the community. Twiggy's other sister, you know, whom we mentioned just now, Soldier 11, which is kind of funny to me, because like the entire family, you know, all the sisters are like all kinds of fucked up, essentially. Like, in her agent story, Mole in the Hole, we do get a small look at her past, and while it's just a few lines of dialogue, it's quite a character-defining moment, I'd say. Like, she admits to killing rebels just on the orders of his superiors, like no trial, no due process, nothing. Like, she would have never even told us that on her own. She just confirmed it because, like, one of the rebels that we caught in the story told us, like us as the proxies, about it. You know, she says like, I did what I must as a soldier, and my loyal service doesn't require me to be a perfect and flawless individual. Like, she acknowledges her duty, right? But it seems to direct, like, it seems like she's trying to direct fault away from herself and like the ethical implications of that. It goes without saying that her committing war crimes is like kind of like a crazy twist, because up until then, you know, she was like a cool person, right? The idea that prisoners, you know, aka the rebels, are able or allowed, you know, to just be killed off without due process, like that just, you know, like in basic human rights, what? Like, Soldier 11's defense of just following orders, like, it's not just about her. It reinforces the idea that we've seen, like, in the recent trailers, like the Soldier Zero Anby trailers, like, that the new area defense forces, like, they're not the good guys either. Like, what kind of command structure allows, or even, like, what kind of command structure allows, you know, such actions, right? The rebels that were executed by Soldier 11, you know, kind of received the same level of treatment as the rest of Silver Squad, you know, just disposed. Either because keeping prisoners, one that might even have a point, or allies that outstay their welcome, would be too dangerous to keep around. Like, it's like the corrupt and almost fascist command structure of the defense force is still around, right? Like, it's still there. And taking a step back to Soldier 11, though, right? Like, when people originally played through the Soldier 11 agent story, the range of emotions of the feedback, like, was like also pretty widespread in terms of what I saw. Like, everything from people being disgusted, vowing not to play her anymore, all the way to people who, you know, seem to just give her a pass. The reasoning often boiled down to the idea that, you know, maybe the rebels were evil, or that we as Phaethon are also involved in more questionable actions because of our, like, illegal proxy identity, right? But this proxy justification, to me, kind of feels shaky a little bit, because it's like, of course, right? Being a proxy is illegal, but Bell and Weiss never acted in, you know, such a harmful way. Like, we've been shown, you know, countless times, you know, as helpful, caring people, and, you know, I can't think the part of the script where it's mentioned. Like, even I think Julienne once mentioned that, you know, she doesn't, like, fully agree with proxies being illegal, or like, so the argument of, like, oh, we're illegal, therefore Soldier 11's war crimes are okay, you know, it just doesn't kind of seem right to me. So, of course, you know, there were also people that had some pretty neutral opinions, right? Where they could see that Soldier 11, you know, like what she did was horrible, but it would make like it made her a more interesting character, you know, which I think is great, right? Like it's always nice seeing characters, you know, that they can be liked and disliked, both for valid reasons, right? It adds a lot of depth to each character, you know. However, what kind of saddens me is that this pass that is given to one character, you know, who admits to war crimes under, you know, under like the guise of following orders, right? But yet hold like Twiggy's like, you know, like almost desperate, you know, actions, like although they were horrific, you know, they hold those to a higher standard, maybe, right? Like I think maybe it's just because one of them is already playable, while the other like isn't, right? So both sisters have like committed like awful acts, right, rooted in their circumstances, and like because they like were like they felt like they were, you know, supposed to be doing that. So just like how Soldier 11 is kind of like a multi-layered personality with lots of Soldier 11's mains, you know, loving, you know, the whole personality with like the spicy noodles, and, you know, like maybe even like looking past it or joking about the war crimes. Like I think Twiggy could fit in pretty well in that regard. And I mean, Twiggy isn't like a psychopath either. In the final confrontation with Anby, that, you know, it kind of like offers a critical insight into like her psychological state and her relationships and whatever, right? Like despite everything she's done, right? She deeply cares about her sisters, right? She admits to the organ harvesting, admitting to killing the sisters, and like she feels absolutely awful for it, right? Depending on how you view the scene, like, you know, does Twiggy kill herself? Or like what's going on, right? Like, does she kill herself, you know, because she realized that, you know, all she was, like, everything she's done was for nothing, or, right? Like, she injects herself with the serum, and when Girl A does the same, you know, like, she like, Twiggy kind of, like, freaks out. She's like, oh, you know, idiot, you know, are you insane? Like, you know, your body won't be able to handle it, right? Like, that just kind of, like, it kind of shows, like, a concern, you know, for Girl A and the other replicas and whatnot, right? And then when Girl A says, like, you know, her response, like, speaking for the first time ever, right? Like, I want to protect you, protect all of you. Thank you for letting me be born. I will never let you be lonely, right? I think that is extremely significant, at least for me, changes the way I look at Twiggy as a whole. So even though Twiggy has been so far been shown as, you know, direct, rude, non-caring, right? Except for a moment of like a raw absolute panic right now. And, you know, the moments with Anby, right? Where she's like, oh man, you know, I deeply wish that, you know, we could be a family again. You know, the replicas and Girl A, right? They still care so much for Twiggy. Despite the circumstances of the creation, right? The organ harvesting, the replicas, like, especially Girl A, right? Like remember, this was right after Twiggy explicitly told Anby about the organ harvesting. You know, her plans, her greater goals, right? Like, all of the replicas know what's going on, right? And still, like, Girl A's gratitude, you know, for being born, for being brought into this world, right? But kind of like really shows to me that Twiggy, like, in her own way, provided them with an existence, you know, worth appreciating. And like even a person, like, and even a sense of purpose and belonging. Like, Twiggy created a family for all of them. Another point during the comic image, right, where Twiggy and Gray are getting corrupted, you know, the two of them are like kneeling down, right, in pain, like holding and comforting each other, while the other, you know, like nameless replicas are kind of like, you know, embracing them, hugging them, right? And just the weight of seeing them like this, right? Like, that really gave me the sense of, like, despite everything, right, they're grateful for their existence and the desire to remain with Twiggy, you know, something that Anby, you know, didn't want to do. So, like, at this level of love the replicas still share for Twiggy, like, hopefully makes people question the nature of their relationship, like, with the replicas and how they, like, perceive Twiggy, like, despite the circumstances of their creation and you know, the organ harvesting and them all getting killed, right? Like, it kind of shows, like, that her, like, internal thoughts and the bonds she, like, creates with the replicas, like, like she's so much more than just a simple like throwaway antagonist. And you know, this kind of like is even like continued in the Pedicus boss fight, you know, where it's like the you know, the dual Anby typing and the, you know, the frenzy state, you know, being triggered by, you know, when the other goes down. Like obviously this kind of like shows like this like deep rooted connection, you know, the emotional bond and the desire for revenge, you know, for killing the partner, right? Like a mirroring girl A's attachment to Twiggy and the other way around. Because, you know, Twiggy also cares a lot about girl A. And so because of this, I think, in my personal opinion, what Twiggy did to the replicas was definitely wrong. But like their love and their loyalty, like, give me kind of like a different way to look at her. Like it really shows that deep down, like below all the trauma, there are different sides of her personality, like, and the ability to form loving connections. Like even though she did bad things, like it really shows like deep down, you know, below all the trauma, below all the horrific stuff that happened to everyone involved, you know, there are different sides to her personality, and Twiggy is so much more than just, you know, being this like, you know, ruthless, you know, psychopath, right? She does forge, you know, loving relationships, like, you know, Girl A, for example, you know, like the clones loving her, like, of course, it doesn't fully excuse, you know, what she did. But, you know, this doesn't strike me as like a completely murderous, you know, like involuntary organ harvesting, you know, operation, right? Like it's kind of like more of a hive mind, I guess, where it's like maybe the clones are like, oh yes, okay, you know, like I am okay with what's going on because I understand the greater good, right? So like at least that's kind of like the way I see it. Maybe this is a different way to look at it. So let's actually take a look at what at least I think, you know, could be the major plot point now is, right? Like there is one major hurdle for Twiggy, you know, for her to become playable, you know, or even return as a character in general. Like she is dead, unfortunately, right? Like especially like with theory crafting everything. Like with Pulchra, it was a lot easier. Like since even then they teased like her joining the Sons of Caledon during during the story dialogue, right? Like despite that, I do have a few ideas which they could integrate Twiggy back into the story. But keep in mind, like I'm writing this as of the Zenless 1.6 patch, so part 2 of the Bury Your Tears with the past. You know, the part 2 hasn't come out yet. So one potential plot point that could be explored, that could also just have been a mistake or not well thought out by the writing team, is Twiggy's transformation to the final showdown, in my opinion. If you think about it, Twiggy received a serum from Hartman Ravenlock, an Exaltist, right? So I'm going to assume Sarah is pulling the strings and she would have access to the most like potent sacrifice material, such as the one that she used for the experiment with Bringer, right? Like I'm still a little confused as to what the actual purpose of the serum was in the agent story. Like Hartman says to Twiggy that like she already had ordered the stuff prior to like Anby showing up. So I don't think Twiggy was planning on using it against resistors. Like, but aside from that, like even though Hartman says it's not new Eridu tech, so be careful. Like, why did Twiggy and Girl A, like why didn't they turn into sacrifices? Like in the enemy Pokédex, you know, whatever. It's like they're declassified as ethereal enemies, while Bringer, you know, is classified as a sacrifice separately. But still, in the cutscene afterwards, right, Twiggy kept her consciousness, you know, like as she was dying when she was already in ethereal for quite some time, right? Like usually when people turn into ethereals, like Silver during the prologue, or that, you know, the orphan in the Harumasa agent story, right? Like they just, you know, they turn into ethereals and they're gone. But Twiggy's conscience stayed until the very end. Furthermore, when you try to dissuade Anby from destroying the technology, like even the protagonists say, like, for better or for worse, Silver Company technology has the power to change the world entirely. I can't help but think of the possibilities it holds for our future. Plus, there's no way I could ignore all the weird stuff that's happened today. For example, that medicine, or how Twiggy turned into an ethereal that seemed more cunning than the average one, right? Like this suggests that maybe, similar to how Bringer survived the boss fight, you know, just surviving as kind of an arm, maybe there was a part of Twiggy that that didn't disappear into thin air, and she manages to recover, even if she isn't as potent as Springer, right? Like, since they mentioned in the 2.0 livestream that they wish to go more deeply into the Exaltist faction, I'm hoping that this could be a place where Twiggy could show up again, like maybe even as an antagonist like Pulchra, before she ultimately becomes playable, or kind of like as a reformed Twiggy, who now like combats Hardman or the other Exaltists. Granted, he doesn't get offed in 1.7, and I hope I'm not jinxing this now, right? But anyway, yeah, like maybe this was also an attempt by Hoyoverse to also experiment more with corrupted characters. Like originally they teased that concept with Harumasa, but with Twiggy now being ethereal, maybe there is a way to like give her moveset ethereal powers, right? Since one of the things mentioned in both the story and by Zenless players that Twiggy can't fight. However, this leads me to my next point. One of the things that are often brought up when discussing Twiggy is that in the story, like it's often mentioned that Twiggy can't fight, right? And while yes, it's true that yes, it is mentioned in the story pretty frequently, I think it's important to not look at the statement in a vacuum, like both in the story and in terms of the game as a whole, right? Like first off, the idea that Twiggy can't fight seems somewhat contradictory to her background. Like she wasn't just a random individual. She was a member of Silver Squad, one of the Defense Force's most elite units. So while Anby is, obviously, exceptionally talented, she's the captain. The fact that Twiggy was even part of Silver Squad, like, implies a certain level of competence and intelligence in combat. Like, she definitely wasn't Anby's equal, but to say that she was completely useless in combat also doesn't sit right with me. Like, in the ZZZ universe, where even regular citizens have to defend themselves against the Hollows, being part of, like, an elite unit, it gives me the feeling that she'd still outclass the average person. After all, like, even though she was a strategist, not a fighter, she was still a soldier. Also, if we were to take the statement that, she can't fight at face value, like, even within the established lore of Zenless Zone Zero, right? Not every playable character is a skilled soldier or agent, right? Like, Astro Yao is probably the best example. She's a singer, not a fighter. Right? And yet she's a playable character, arguably, like top in the meta and enabled so many team combinations and compositions, and like it's also mentioned that while Twiggy isn't a good fighter, she's an extremely good strategist. Like Anby's quotes, "You're not as terrible a fighter as you think, your sharp mind makes up for it," or "It's another legacy of Silver Company. Back then we had a brilliant sister who excelled in strategy over combat." Right, like her skill set could easily revolve around, buffing abilities, debuffing enemies, or providing some form of like utility or defensive support, involving more of the character that Twiggy was set up to be in the beginning. Furthermore, I think this would also give Hoyoverse kind of like give them an option to sell a support version of Anby, like the mascot of the game, right? So in my opinion, the lack of combat power that that gets attributed to her doesn't really matter too much when you kind of like think about it a little bit. Also, possibility that could be explored, and well, I do agree that there could be a lot of potential problems that could arise with involving such a topic, is the time travel that was teased by the NPC Lily near Howard's newsstand. About how, oh, hey, there's a rumor about, Hollow Zero where there might be, where it might be possible to travel to a fixed point in time. As it stands right now in 1.6, Hugo is considered dead, and obviously he will be brought back since he'll become playable in chapter 1.7, right? Like, since he's a vampire, there might be other possibilities for his survival. Maybe just, because he's a kind of a trickster, oh, hey, maybe it was just a very convoluted plan, right? So saving the time travel option to save Twiggy could be a possibility. Like in terms of the story, we're currently in the early stages of starting to fight the Exaltists, and with Hoyoverse confirming that in 2.x they'll also dive deeper into this cult. Maybe there could be plot reasons where we'd need more inside information, right? Something that Twiggy, who had worked with them, might be able to give us. However, maybe instead of going fully back in time, maybe we could also see our story like going back in terms of ether corruption. In the Read You newsletter, there was once a newspaper article that mentioned that there are ways to partially like revert ether corruption, right? Meaning that there may be a chance for Twiggy to come back. Like we've had similar tiny teasers, you know, such as Astro Yao, who appeared in the in-game billboards and advertisements for a while before she was eventually turned into a playable character. Like furthermore, like remember Twiggy's wish that maybe she could have studied 3 forms of etheric manifestation in specific hollows? Like since this is a topic she is interested in, maybe she included some ether studies in her work, something that Anby could have discovered in the end of the agent story, and you know will be going back for when when the story calls for it, and then they revert Twiggy's corruption, right? Like since it's only partial, maybe that's another way they could tie in Twiggy, you know, and her ether abilities that she could potentially get. The thing though, why would Anby go back for Twiggy? She said so herself, actually, right? Like in part 2 of the agent story, they made a big deal about Anby promising Twiggy that she would go back for her and redeem her, just for it all to completely fall apart when Anby learns that like more about what Twiggy had been up to. And it's kind of strange to me, especially since Twiggy had already done, you know, the cloning and the organ harvesting that made Anby so disgusted. Like, what if Twiggy had said, you know, look, hey, I'm sorry, Anby, like, I don't think you'll be able to forgive me because, you know, I did all of that stuff in part 2, right? Would Anby have reacted the same way? Like, why the big switch all of a sudden, right? Like, I sincerely hope that Anby will eventually uphold her promise of redeeming Twiggy. Especially what Twiggy got was not a redemption. It was kind of like the writers being like, oh man, you know, we have like this cool character and we can't like, you know, we don't really know how to write her into a redeeming character because it's like already the end of part 3 and let's just kill her off, right? Like, not to bash Zenless, like, and the story in total, like I think it's the best and most interesting story I've seen, right? But Twiggy really deserves better, both in the story, her life, and the writing of the story. But keep in mind, this is all just speculation, you know, filled by hopes and dreams, copium and hopium. All about a character that I personally felt extremely connected to, and, you know, I desperately wish for her to deserve a happy end. And, you know, this might also end in a r/Senora mains, you know, rooting for you folks, by the way, situation, right? But I will be holding on. So these are some of the reasons as to why I think that Twiggy is a genuinely amazingly written character with a deeply relatable core. Like, it just pulls on your heartstrings, and because she's not just like a flat irredeemable psychopath, right? Like, she definitely deserves to be brought back and returned as a playable character. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have more points to share? I'm always happy to see people talk about Twiggy. I'd like to give a huge shout out to the Twitter account @TimelyTwiggy for the Twiggy footage that you've seen throughout the entire video. I genuinely could not have done it without you. Thank you so much. Please make sure to give them a follow. If you'd also like to see more Twiggy content or are interested in her character, come and join the r/Twiggy main subreddit, as well as the Discord server that will be coming up soon. Links to everything is in the description. And with that, thank you so much for watching this video. I wish you a lovely day.